there's a level of grief attached to this event. Have you actually grieved that? Have you
Mhm.
actually felt that grief and released it? Because all of our emotions are housed in our body. We keep them in our body unless we release them, right? So if you've experienced 15 or 20 of these grief events, if you haven't acknowledged them and released them and grieved them, they're still sitting inside of you. So maybe now you are suffering from a lot of depression and anxiety and insomnia and weight gain and all these things because everything else is building up inside and you haven't dealt with it.
This show is all about helping you up-level your life, including your well-being, your relationships, your mental health, your wealth, your confidence, and your joy. I challenge you to keep an open mind as together we discover tips, tools, and advice from the experts to help you live life to your fullest potential. Welcome to the Jenna Banks Show. I really appreciate you joining me today. We have a very important subject that I'd like to bring to the table for discussion with someone who you're going to love, I promise you. Now, the topic we're going to talk about is grief. Now, healing from grief, moving on from grief, dealing with grief, all of that. Whether you've experienced the loss of a loved one or the loss of a relationship or the loss of a pet or the loss of something, anything that you love, grief is real. And grief can have a bigger impact in on our lives than I think most of us realize. And if we don't really fully process that emotion, then it can really just stay stuck and really impact our lives in a negative way. So that's why I really thought it was important for us to shine a light on this topic today. And who better to do that with than Margaret Dennis? Now, Margaret is a women's life empowerment and grief coach. She helps women to heal from their past trauma so that they can authentically and powerfully step into their best lives. Margaret is a TEDx speaker, a writer, an educator, and a certified shoe junkie. Margaret, welcome to the show today. So nice to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's so nice to be here too. I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. This is a really important subject that I don't think gets enough attention. In fact, I think the first time I really started contemplating what we're going to talk about today about grief is when you and I talked.
Mm, yeah.
Do you hear that a lot with your clients and friends and whomever you encounter?
I do. Grief isn't really a topic people just bring up in a conversation. It's something that people tend to run screaming in the opposite direction and they try and avoid. But it's really important. It's an important topic and we all experience it at some point in our lives. So why shouldn't we talk about it? I think
Absolutely.
it should be. I think my mission right now is to get it out there as a regular topic of conversation. So yeah.
It should be. Yeah, we should normalize grief. And that's why I wanted to highlight this for everyone today because grief is a lot deeper. It has a much bigger effect on our lives than we know. So I would love to ask you a little bit about how you got into this line of work. What actually compelled you to do this?
A few things. I think the biggest thing that it was for me is I did a TED Talk last year entitled What I Learned About Grief Through the Eyes of My Child. And it was based on the observing my daughter deal with her own grief. And when she was born, she was a twin. And her brother, or older brother, by 15 minutes, he passed away 3 days after the babies were born. And so, it was my experience with grief at that point, but it was really hard to grieve as a new mom and a grieving mom at the same time. So I buried my grief and didn't really deal with it. And then fast forward 13 years and I get an opportunity to do a TED Talk. And so I start writing about grief. I've always wanted to share the story of my daughter, and she's just such an amazing, miraculous kid. And I started looking at grief and researching it, and it was the things I found out. People don't talk about it, and people are really shoved away in outside of society to deal with it. But when I watched my daughter deal with grief, that was what really, when I sat back and went, what was her journey like? And I never lied to her about her brother. In fact, she knew about her brother before she could talk. And so watching her go through her journey of grief, like she's basically been living grief since day one. And watching how she progressed in it was really incredible. Kids have a natural ability to deal with grief. They express their emotions, they ask questions, they integrate it as part of their lives. It becomes a fact as opposed to something to avoid. And they talk about it. And then as we get up into our older years, society says, no, 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 no. We don't want to hear about it. It's too scary. It's too vulnerable. It may affect me. I don't want to deal with it. And so I started to like go, no, we need to talk about this. And so I really started jumping into the world of grief and realizing that yes, there is a lot of people working in the grief field, a ton of people, but it's not mainstream and it's not, regular conversation. And so I've started writing about it. I write for a couple of magazines. I'm writing a book about it, but I started also jumping into coaching more and more. Like I've already been coaching, but now I'm coaching more around the grief. And I had found, and as I dug a little deeper, a lot of the women that I coach, no matter what it is that they're coming to me for, if you dig deep enough, there is always a layer of grief somewhere that hasn't been acknowledged, it hasn't been dealt with, it hasn't been felt. And so for me, that's a really big part of the healing process. So that's kind of a roundabout way to say how I got into grief, but it's for me, it just became this burning knot and passion in my stomach that was like, yes, this needs to be talked about. It needs to be a topic and it needs to be dealt with. And whoever I can help, I will help.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. So, a question that comes to mind for me is how is it that your daughter was dealing with grief, given that her sibling, died before she could even remember?
Yeah. So I think with twins too, there's always that connection, whether they're together or apart. And I don't know, in the back of my mind, I was like, there's going to be come a day where she's gonna be like, Mom, something's missing, something's missing, something's missing. And I didn't ever want her to just find out later on in life that she had a twin. I didn't think that was fair. But it was interesting watching her for the first 3 to 4 years. We would talk about her brother almost like he was here, right? She would always, and then around the age of 3.5 or 4, the penny dropped that he died. And so she was just really, truly emotional. And so a lot of what I talk about in the speech is that, she was just this really fierce warrior with her grief.
Mhm.
She asked questions. There would be times it would be in the most, I would think, inconvenient spaces to be talking about it. We're walking to the fair with all of our friends and she'll go, Mom, what do you think, Isaac, blah, 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 blah. And she started asking questions. I'm like,
Oh my gosh.
if we're talking about this now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But with her, I think I just saw the strength inside of her and how strong she was just talking about it. And I think her experience with grief really helped her. She had a friend of hers who was a year younger than her. And I think they met when she was 2 or 3, and they were best friends. They lived around the corner from each other. They played together all the time. And when he was 4, he was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Oh my
And so my daughter was a friend of his all the way through his treatments. And then at the age of 10, he passed away.
God.
And we had seen him a couple of weeks before. He was in hospice and we went to see him. He'd passed away on the Thursday and she came home Monday and just said, Mom, I wrote my speech. And I was like, speech for what?
Yeah. What?
Like, for what? And she's like, well, to say at Wyatt's funeral. My daughter was 11 when he passed away. And I said to her, I'm like, you want to write it? You say a speech? She goes, yeah, he was my best friend. I was like, okay. I said, let me check with his parents. And of course, his parents were really up for that. And so my daughter spoke in front of 2 rooms full of people.
Wow.
I couldn't even keep it together. I was a basket case at the front of the room.
I can
But I
imagine.
was standing there with her and she cried, but she did her speech and she honored her brother too. She mentioned her brother. And I was just like, and I looked at her and I thought, how did you get to be that strong?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is just part of it is her character, but also she's already gone through grief, right? She'd already dealt with a whole bunch of grief and just knowing that she used to have a brother or she has a brother, he's just not here. And yeah, I think for me, there's just so much respect and love for her and admiration for how she presents herself to the world. And
Mhm.
she isn't shy about talking about her grief. She's had cashiers ask her if she has any brothers or sisters. And she's like, I have a brother, but he died. And she just does it matter of factly. And everyone else around is like backpedaling, going, oh my goodness, I've opened Pandora's box, run, run, run. And I'm left making it better and smoothing it over. And I thought, no, we need to be able to talk about grief.
Yeah.
We really, really do. And if we can do it like a child does it and treat it like a fact, and not run away from the emotion, how much better off would we be?
Totally. Yeah, totally. So what kinds of grief do you find that people deal with? Like, what kinds of situations would cause them to go through tremendous grief?
Well, there is the usual, right? It's the
Mhm.
death of a partner, a parent, or a child, or a cousin that you're really close to, friends you're close to. Death is a really big one for people, obviously. But grief is also considered any loss or change, right?
Yeah.
Sudden change. Grief could happen when you get married. Oh, it's one of the happiest times of your life, and you could experience grief because you're grieving over, I'm no longer single. That part of my life is over. Or you can grieve becoming a new mother because you're like, again, I am now responsible for another human being for the rest of my life, or at least for the next 18 years. And I am no longer just a single being, right? I am
Right.
now attached to this new being and I am responsible. So there's a little bit of grief of leaving that independence behind in some
Mhm.
way. And then your kids go off to college, right? You're so excited for them to grow, but there's that empty nest syndrome. Um, and then there's all the other things that happen in your life: divorce, separation, infertility, miscarriage. You fail your exams in grade 9, you fail your driver's test at 16, you flunk out of college or you don't get into the first college you want, your best friend
Mhm.
moves away. Like, there are so many different things that happen to us in our life that can cause grief experiences, and we didn't know about that. And so I teach a workshop called Empowered Grief Warriors, and I target women because I work mainly with women. And so in my work with that and developing that workshop, I was like, wow, we need to figure this out and figure out how much women have experienced. So I developed a grief scale,
Oh,
actually has 30 different life events on it. And I'm working on expanding it to 50 at least, because I know there's thousands out there we could include. But I give it to the women in my workshop and I say, okay, check off how many of these have happened to you. And inevitably, there are women who are like, "Oh my goodness, I never even knew."
mm.
And so I had one woman in my class that out of 30, she had 29
Oh my God.
into her. And
Wow.
it's like, I didn't even realize some of these things would be attached to grief. And it's because it was a loss, or a change in your life. And I think my score is about 12 or 14.
Hmm.
And everybody I do it with, they're always amazed, and this awareness around, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea." And I think it's partly because we just don't educate people around grief, right? We can talk about stress and depression and anxiety till the cows come home, but start talking about grief and people are like, "Run away, I'm not gonna,"
Yeah.
it's a little too much.
It's a lot. Yeah.
It is. It
So
is.
well, first off,
No.
tell us a little bit about your scale. Is it something that anyone can take or
Mhm. It is, it is. I
okay.
do have it on my website,
Okay.
so if you go to my website at www.evolvecoaching, EVOLV, no E, coaching, COACHING.com, and you click on the resources tab, it's the first resource under there, and there's a hyperlink to the scale, and you can take it and just, check it out for yourself and see how that goes.
And
Um
how would somebody do you put in there like what it means, like how to interpret the scale? Like let's say someone does have 20 or something, like just, is there a way to interpret that?
I think the reason I developed the scale was really to create awareness. And so what I encourage people to do with that is to go in and say, okay, if there's a level of grief attached to this event, have you actually grieved that? Have you actually
Mhm.
felt that grief and released it? Because all of our emotions are housed in our body. We keep them in our body unless we release them, right? So if you've experienced 15 or 20 of these grief events, if you haven't acknowledged them and released them and grieved them, they're still sitting inside of you. So maybe now you are suffering from a lot of depression and anxiety and insomnia and weight gain and all these things because everything else is building up inside and you haven't dealt with it.
Yes. So,
So it's still
you make a
going.
really good point. Yeah, like right. So I would like to talk about that for a minute because it's something I'm aware of, but I don't think people can hear it enough, especially well, if you've never heard it, then it's the first time. So then it's not too much, of course. So maybe you could break that down a little bit for someone who isn't familiar with what this means, that our emotions can, get stuck in our body and unless we release them, right? Unless
Mhm.
we let them move through us. Can you
100%.
explain a little bit more about what that is?
So with our emotions, every time you have an experience in your life, good, bad, or otherwise, your mind remembers it, but your body creates a memory for that too. So I like to use the example of popcorn. So, say you're at the movies and you have popcorn and it's really good and you really are excited about that and you get this positive memory about having popcorn and the smell of movie popcorn.
I love popcorn.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm picturing it now. It's smelling and
I
tasting
know.
it right
And you're
now.
watering, your mouth is starting to water, isn't it?
Yeah, it
A
is.
little bit, right?
Yeah.
So when you start thinking about that, your body is creating that saliva that is remembering what it was like to have that popcorn,
Yep.
right? And all you had to do was think about it,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
it's the same thing if you walk past a store that sells popcorn and you smell the popcorn, again, that memory is going to come back. It your memory remembers it, but your body, like your mouth starts to water
Mm.
and you get, maybe that excited feeling in your stomach because you're going to have popcorn. Your body remembers that memory too. And so that's what happens when you experience grief. I don't know about anybody else who's experienced it, but I know when I've experienced it, I get exhausted.
Mm.
I curl up in a ball and want to cry. I feel nauseous. My eyes are sore. Um, just from crying. Like the grief is a full body experience, right?
Mm.
And if you're in a situation where you can't express your feelings or you are refusing to acknowledge them and you're like, push them down, your body's going to hold on to those things. And for me, I did a lot of pushing down because I had a brand new baby. And not only was she a brand new baby, she was a brand new baby in the intensive care unit for 6.5 months.
Oh,
So it was back and forth to the hospital. I had to be strong for her. I didn't have time to grieve. So I pushed it down. And what happened with me is I was focused on raising this new baby. We did a brief celebration of life for my son a week after after he was born, and that was the extent of what I did for grief for me. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, and I'm at an international conference with 10,000 people, sitting in the middle of a row, and I was loving the speaker, and they must have said something.
mhm.
I had this complete breakdown in the middle of an aisle and I couldn't leave because I was in the middle of the row.
Oh my
And then I'm sobbing and, snot running down my nose.
God.
It's not pretty. But
Yeah.
I was totally embarrassed because I didn't know what to do and the people around me didn't know what to do. And all I can think about is we shouldn't have to be embarrassed about being sad.
Yeah.
But a lot of that happened for me because I didn't deal with it. Right. And grief will come out
Yeah.
whether you want it to or not. And the most inopportune time.
Mhm.
I've heard of people bursting into tears in the boardroom. It's not just what's happening in the boardroom, it's everything that's built up inside of them that they haven't dealt with yet.
That makes so much sense. So if anyone has encountered anyone who's just started bawling out of nowhere and it seems unusual, just know that it's probably your body's response to all this pent up
Yep.
grief or whatever. But
Mhm.
any kind of emotion can get
Oh,
stuck in our
100%.
body, and if we don't let it come through, will go through us,
Yeah.
move through us, and don't properly experience the emotion, it will just stay stuck there, right? And like you said,
Well,
it turns into, weight gain, stress, anxiety,
mhm.
all kinds of issues, and it
Yeah.
could also even turn into disease, from what I
Mhm.
understand,
Mhm.
cancer, etc.
100%. 100%. And I think we are a product of our society, and especially in North America, right? You go down into Latin America and they've got the Day of the Dead and they express their grief and they celebrate people and they surround, like their community comes together when someone passes away. Come into North America and they first 3 days are like, oh, we're really sad. We'll help you maybe a couple of weeks. And then we
And buck it up, buttercup. Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
Buckle up, buttercup. Back to work you go. And we expect you to be the same person doing the same level of work, doing the same thing. And oh, can you still be running the PTA? And can you still be looking after your kids? And can you still be? And you don't get a chance to grieve.
Yeah.
And you are forced back into society, and people just don't know A, how to support you, and B, they're afraid to because they don't, it's for them, they almost look like grief is a disease that you can catch. And I think when
Mhm.
you get into your brain stem, like into your reptilian brain and your limbic system, they view grief as a threat, right? It's like if I see you grieving, ooh, I don't ever want that to happen to me because then I'm going to feel the same way. It's going to really be emotionally painful. So instead, I'm going to say, be brave, be strong. And if I can do that, then my brain thinks that if you can be brave and strong, then I dodged a bullet, right?
So, what would be a better way to handle it? Let's say you encounter somebody who's grieving. What
Mhm.
is a better way to handle it than say, "Oh, you'll be okay. You can be strong."
Yeah, don't say that.
That's not
Say
fair.
what? I think when you encounter someone who is grieving, you can tell them, "I'm really sorry for your loss," or "I'm really sorry that happened to you." Whatever it is that happened. Don't say, "I know exactly how you feel," because you don't. You absolutely not. You may both have experienced the same thing, like you both lost a spouse or you both, lost a job, but you are not them and they are not you. So how you experience your grief is on you and how they experience grief is on them. But you can say, "You know what? I'm really sorry that it happened to you, or I'm really sorry for your loss. What do you need? How can I help you?" And even when you say, "How can I help you?" odds are they're not going to know how to even vocalize what they need.
Mhm.
But you can say, "I'm here for you." And then actually be there for them.
Yeah.
Show up at their house with a casserole or something, or, come over and make sure that they're not in the same pajamas from 2 weeks ago. And
Mm.
it's not that you want to usher them out the door back into society before they're ready, but you want them to know that you're not alone. If that means sitting on the couch with them, saying nothing and just letting them cry, do that because it's not about you.
Yeah,
It's about the person who's grieving.
that's right.
And so many people make it about them.
Mm.
I'm uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. Oh my goodness, can she get over it already? Like, there's so many people who make the grief process about them, and it isn't. It's about the person who's grieving. So if you can't show up in a supportive way, don't show up at all because you're not going to be helpful.
Word to the wise. Thank you for that. Now,
Yeah.
I personally had I'm just thinking back to when I had extreme grief, and of course, one was when my grandfather died. Not so much when my grandmother died, which was more recently because it was all expected, and I was actually relieved for her because she
Yeah.
was to a nice old age, and I
Mhm.
knew she was suffering, so I
Yeah.
was happy for her and
Yeah.
got to celebrate her life. But there was one situation where I had been in a relationship with somebody for a while, and what it was manipulated and deceived, and I didn't know it
For the
in a huge,
yeah.
huge way.
Okay.
And when it came to my attention, actually, I discovered it randomly, unexpectedly, and it was just dumped on me all at once. And I just, my whole world turned upside down.
Mhm.
It's almost like reality changed because what was all of a sudden I realized wasn't. And
Yeah.
that was a major grieving process for me. I
Mhm.
mean, and like you said, life was too busy, right? You got to go to work. You got to, I mean,
Yeah.
breaking up with somebody doesn't, allow you to take time off for
No.
grieving.
No.
So I was literally at my desk, which was in a big open area, but I had a cubicle around me, crying,
Mhm.
like literally sometimes sobbing
Yeah.
to the point where I could not focus. And this went on for days and days and days. And I thought, when am I going to find my grounding? I mean, I could be normal for a little while, a couple of hours, and then something would make me
Mhm.
tear up and it would start all over again. That said, I'm really happy that the emotion just forced itself out and I let
Mhm.
it out because it allowed me to process it, and then I was able to move on, but it took a little while, but I allowed that to, and I wasn't aware at that time of the importance of expressing it and the importance of letting it move through your body. Thankfully, that didn't get stuck, um, but I can imagine if I had bottled that up, all
Mhm.
that energy of that grief, oh my goodness,
Oh, yeah.
who knows how it would have manifested itself
Yeah.
in my
And
body.
yeah. No, you're very lucky that it came out and it did it on its own and that you let it too, right? Like there was that. And there are times you get to the point where you can't stop it because it's just on its own. It's coming, whether you want it to or not.
Yeah.
But it's so important to let it out. And it's unfortunate you had to do it at your desk. So
Very.
yeah, I've been there too. I've had meltdowns at my desk too. And the thing with grief is if it's something you've experienced that's really deep and really traumatic, it will be with you forever.
Hmm.
And not at that intense level, but there will always be something within that that you might get triggered with, right?
Mm.
And it may not be a big trigger, it might just be a twitch. But I know for me, losing my son, there are still days that I get triggered that I will sit and cry and cry and cry. And other days, and most, like I say 99% of the time, I'm pretty good. But, as we're moving into the holidays and around their birthday and things like that, and when I see my daughter out playing with, mixed crowds, I wonder, oh, it would have been nice, what would it have been like with her brother? And you get those little twinges. Um, and that's normal. But so, I like to reassure people that's not always going to be as intense. It's not always going to be as in your face. But you need to get through that time, and you have to allow the grief to happen and allow the grief to flow and come and out.
Mhm.
You can't bottle it up. It does not help you. And it certainly doesn't help the relationships around you, because then you just get all testy and prickly,
Right.
and it comes out in nasty things, and that you don't mean that. It's your body's way of trying to say, hey, can you pay attention to what's going on inside?
I
Um,
like how you gave us the popcorn analogy because that comes to mind as you say that, because you can't forget popcorn.
no.
You really can't forget what that smells like and tastes like if you don't like it or if you do like it, right? It's a very special kind of flavor and smell. It is really unique on its own. So you probably can never forget that. And I think that that makes me think of how you're talking about grief in the
Mhm.
same way. It's like, yeah, you can't really forget that incident, that situation will be forever ingrained into your memory.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's good to know that
Yeah.
it'll never go away.
Yeah.
That memory will never go away. It triggered a deep emotional response. However, it's really important to let the emotions fully run through you, cry it out, right? What else would you recommend? How else can somebody get that out of them?
There's a few different ways. When I'm working with clients, I have them do a couple of different things. One of them, I have them do journals. I give them journal prompts. They journal, but they do that outside of the coaching sessions. But the other thing that I do is within the coaching session, and it's a specific coaching methodology that I've been trained on called profound impact coaching. It was created by a gentleman named Ryan Matthew. And I've just come through the first cohort of being trained in this methodology, and it is absolutely incredible. It is all about transcendence. It takes you from your thoughts into your feelings and into your body. And so what I do with my clients is when they're really struggling around what's going on, and or they have a lot of feelings coming up, I have them go into this state where they just close their eyes and they go in, they let the thoughts come, then they go into the body, and they really let themselves feel. And for some of them, this is the first time they've really had a safe space to express how they feel. So sometimes they just sit and cry. Sometimes it's they feel their anger or their frustration, or for the first time they allow themselves to feel relieved. So yeah, there's a whole lot that they can experience through that process.
Mhm.
And I find that it really, really works well for them. And at
Mhm.
the end of it, going through that process with them, they feel lighter.
Yeah, I can
And
imagine.
it's because it's a big release. But then within that too, it's not just feeling the feelings, it's finding where in the body are those feelings coming up. Sometimes it's around the neck or the shoulders or the heart or the stomach or the legs or your head. And so I have them, put their hands wherever they're feeling it too, because it really helps them connect to the emotion that they have. And then they just start listening to what else is coming up for them. Their body's full of wisdom.
Mm.
Maybe it's their body saying it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be sad. Or it's okay to feel relief. It's okay to feel guilty. It's your body's it really connects people right back down to the root of where their emotions come from. And so many people live in their head, and that's why we don't express our emotions, because we're really disconnected between the heart and the mind. And we need
Oh,
to really connect back up to that, right?
no.
Yeah.
That's the difference, from what I understand, between the masculine and the feminine, right? We're very much in a more masculine-oriented society.
Very much so. Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that is more of the thinking side of us, our mind versus our heart.
Mhm.
But moving and probably that might be why you work with women more, right? To get us more in touch with
Yeah.
our heart, because unfortunately, like I said, in this society, we haven't really been conditioned to fully
No,
live in that way. And so
no.
men and women need that, by the way.
Yeah, they do. They do. Both men and women do need it. And both men and women are capable of of connecting to that,
Mhm.
as long as they're allowing themselves to be open to connecting to do that too, right? There's a two-way thing. I can lead you through it, but if you're not willing to actually go there, that's,
Mm.
it has to be a partnership in that coaching situation. But I'll tell you the results that have been coming out of working with my clients doing that. It's incredible. The
Mhm.
things that have surfaced, sometimes it's memories from when they were 3. All of a sudden, it's like, okay, I realize I'm sad about this, and this is what's really frustrating me. Now I understand where it comes from. It's really tapping in because, like I said, the body holds all those memories, right?
Yeah.
So you start giving yourself space and time. It's really important to close your eyes when you do it so that you don't get distracted by what's going on around you and really focus on the inside. And it's amazing what comes up and just the awareness. And some people it's like, wow, okay, now I know I can move on.
Yeah.
And other times it's just really a safe space to express your feelings.
I love it. You keep saying safe space, and I love that so much. I think it's important to really understand what that means because a lot of times we're not safe, right? We can be in families, homes where we don't feel safe. And
Mhm.
safe doesn't mean that or that we're going to be harmed in some physical way. It could be just that we don't feel free to express ourselves.
Mhm.
We
100.
have to cater to somebody. We're into this people pleasing pattern where, maybe a family member or a partner or somebody that we're close to is very much, it's all about them and you need to cater to them all the time. That doesn't allow you to feel safe to be yourself because perhaps you've wrapped a lot of self worth into pleasing this person and that's what you think makes them love you.
Yeah.
And that doesn't also allow you to feel safe. So I think that it's important to really understand what having a safe space means.
Mhm.
If you don't feel comfortable expressing yourself in your current environment, perhaps you don't feel safe there to express it. Doesn't mean you're in danger, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you don't feel safe. So I love that idea of finding a safe space,
Mhm.
whether it's by yourself or with somebody who can give you that safe space
Mhm.
to tune into your grief,
Yeah.
feel it,
Yeah.
express it, and be okay with all of that.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. I think emotions make us vulnerable. I know Brene Brown talks about that all the time. Yeah. And if we aren't feeling safe enough to be vulnerable, then we won't express those emotions, right? Being vulnerable is so important when it comes to emotions and being okay with being vulnerable. And yeah, if you're not feeling safe enough to be vulnerable with your emotions in whatever environment you're in, you won't express them and they will get buried and you'll end up reaping the repercussions of not dealing with them. So I really, really, really encourage people to find a space or an outlet that they can use, whether it's journaling, whether it's exercise, but I don't exercise works to a certain extent, but I really feel like getting the emotion out is an expression, right? So, and especially with grief, there's a lot of sadness and often guilt and relief and resentment and shame. And there's all kinds of things that come along. And that's the big thing with grief is it's all kinds of emotions.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense.
Mhm.
Well, as we get to bring this to a close for everybody, is there any final words you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Oh, I would just say don't run away from your grief. Really give yourself permission to feel and give yourself permission to express those feelings and know that in the process of expressing these feelings, they will not last forever. It may feel horrible or scary at that moment. And you may think, I am never going to stop crying or I am never going to stop feeling angry. But trust me, if you allow yourself that time to actually feel the emotion, you will get through it and you will eventually get to the point where it's not as intense and it's not as in your face and number one thing you think of before you wake up in the morning, before you go to bed. it doesn't have, just being able to feel is so important. So I think my biggest thing right now is just giving everyone permission to feel their grief and really allow them to feel their feelings, because without that, you're going to be stuck in your grief for a very long time.
Beautiful words of wisdom. Thank you so much, Margaret, for sharing. I appreciate it. And just so everyone knows how to get in touch with you in case they want to learn more about your workshops, your coaching services, anything like that, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me on my website at www.evolvecoaching.com. So evolve is EVOLV,
No
no,
E.
no E, coaching, COACHING.com. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram as well under Evolve Coaching or under my name, Margaret Dennis. And yeah, you can find me there too. And contact information's there, phone numbers there, emails there. And yeah, however people want to contact me is great with me.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today and really sharing everything that you shared with us. You're doing some amazing work in the world today. And just thank you for all that you do. I really appreciate you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenna. I've appreciated being on today. Thank you.
I hope you were able to get some great takeaways from this show today. If we haven't connected already, you can find me at my website, which is jenna-banks.com. There you can find links to all my social media. I'm really active on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. If you haven't already signed up for my daily self-love reminders called Love Notes to Myself, I highly recommend you check those out on my website as well. I do hope you will tune in to additional episodes of The Jenna Banks Show, because I have so much more to share with you about how we can truly live our lives to our fullest potential. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I truly hope to see you again next time. And remember, your love is your power. Until next time.